And those people, they just, what he's talking about? Just imagine 90% leaders.
Yeah, I've been there. No, I've been there. All right, let's learn. So today is chapter 5 of Kiddush HaChodesh. Today is a daily one chapter day Rambam. So everything that we said about the Rosh Chodesh, according to witnesses, and everything that we said about adding a month, a leap month, you don't do it unless you have the Sanhedrin, unless you have the rabbinical court in Jerusalem, or you have Bezdins in Israel. That the Sanhedrin, that the main Bezdin gave permission. That's what it says to Moses and Aaron. God says, HaChodesh hazeh lachem. So Moses and Aaron, they got the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, and they were in charge over there, and they pass it on to you and anyone who's in the space of Moshe and Aaron. So Moshe and Aaron, they could you not play with the thing? Moshe and Aaron, basically, they were the ones who got the mitzvah, and they pass it on to all the Sanhedrin for all generations. But when there's no Sanhedrin in Israel, you cannot do it. You make a calculation, you make a calendar like they made, and that's the calendar we have today. This is a law from Moshe at Sinai. It's not written explicitly in the Torah, but it goes back to Moshe at Sinai. When there's a Sanhedrin, you do it with witnesses. And when there's no Sanhedrin, you do it according to the calculation. And you don't use witnesses. So you don't use witnesses. And you only use witnesses once in a while in certain circumstances. When did all Jewish people stop using witnesses in totality and start using the mathematical calendar? So when was that? This was when the end of the time of the Talmud, when Israel was destroyed and there was no set Bezdin. But in the times of the Mishnah and most of the times of the Gemara until Abai and Rava, they would establish it in Israel, and everyone around the world would follow that. When there was a Sanhedrin, they would set it up according to the witnesses, and then they would go to each place. They had the shluchim that would go for Tishrei, and they would tell them when to do. Any place that the shluchim could reach would establish one day of Yom Tif, and other places which were far, they would make 2 days of Yom Tif like we do today outside of Israel. And the times, and now, that's even in Israel. In Israel, where the shluchim didn't come, so like in a lot, for example, there's some people till today, they do 2 days of Pesach and 2 days of Sukkot, because traditionally there wasn't a shluchim of the Bezdin that would go there. Nowadays, when we don't have Sanhedrin and the Bezdin in Israel, we do it totally on the calculation, and all places should do 1 day of Yom Tif, right? Because if we already know when it's going to be, we have our calendars printed for all eternity, we should do 1 day of Yom Tif. Even the far places, like in far places in Israel and in outside Israel, we should do like with people of Israel. However, the rabbi said that we have to be careful to follow the custom of our fathers and do 2 days even outside of Israel. And therefore, any place that didn't have shluchim that came to tell them when the holidays, they would do 2 days. And even nowadays, any places that wouldn't have outside Israel, we do 2 days of the holiday. And people in Israel nowadays, they do 1 day like their custom, because they never did 2 days. Comes out the second day of Yom Tov that we do outside is a rabbinical mitzvah. Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah, when they would do it according to witnesses, most people would do 2 days because they weren't sure, because they couldn't get the witnesses out on the day of Rosh Hashanah. So therefore they would do 2 days. So, and that's interesting. Not only that, but even in Jerusalem itself, where the place of the Bezdin, most times they did 2 days. Because if the witnesses did not come the day before, right at the beginning of the new moon, then they would have to make that day Rosh Hashanah, and it might be too late to do all the sacrifices, so they make that day Rosh Hashanah and the next day Rosh Hashanah. So we learned that even Yom Tov Sheni of Rosh Hashanah nowadays the second day of Rosh Hashanah is rabbinical origin. Interestingly enough, a lot of Jews nowadays only keep 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, but that's the only mitzvah that in the temple in Jerusalem, on most years, majority of the years, they kept 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. We don't do 1 day of Rosh Hashanah is not interdependent on how close you are. For example, if you're, it's not dependent. Sorry, it's dependent on how close you are. It's not dependent on how close you are. For example, if you have a place between you and Jerusalem, which is 5 days or more, for sure you can get witnesses. You don't say, you do it, because who says that they will come to us? Maybe they will come, maybe they won't come. And after they, after they set up the the calculations, the people in those times, they need to do 2 days because maybe they wouldn't have. Not every city in Israel had messengers to come to establish the day. So or there were certain places where Gentiles would stop the Jewish people from coming. So therefore, those places did do 2 days. And if it was dependent on how close you are, everyone in Egypt would do 1 day because you can easily send shluchim from Jerusalem to Egypt on time. And actually, because you could go through Ashkelon and it's only 8 days or less. And similarly, Syria. Comes out that it's not really dependent on how close you are. Rather, this is what it's dependent on. Any place that has between them and Yerushalayim more than 10 complete days, they do 2 days, as the custom was always, because the shluchim could not reach there on time necessarily. But places which are between them and Yerushalayim 10 days or less, and places which between them and Yerushalayim were 10 days, 10 days that it's possible for them to come, they could do it. If the places, if those places are part of the second conquest, for example, Usha and Shfarim and Lod and Yavne and Nod and Tiberia, then they do 1 day. And if those places are from Syria, like Tsur, Damascus, Ashkelon, etc., or outside, for example, Egypt, Ammon, Moab, etc., then they do like whatever their father's tradition was. If their father's tradition was 1 day, they do 1 day. If it was 2 days, they do 2 days. A place that between them and Jerusalem is less than 10 days. 10 days or less, and this is Syria, outside of Israel, and they don't have a custom. For example, it's a new settlement that they do 2 days like the whole world. And every Yom Tov Sheni, every second day is rabbinical, and even the Yom Tov Sheni of Rosh Hashanah, everyone does nowadays, even in Jerusalem. This that we calculate nowadays, each one in their city, we say the Rosh Chodesh is on this and this day, and Yom Tov will be on this place. It's not our calculation that we calculate, because we don't calculate those. We only calculate on the ones of Israel, and this is that we calculate is only to reveal what day they already calculated, since we know that according to them we're relying. And it establishment of Bnei Yisrael in those times was Rosh Chodesh Yom Tov is not because our calculation. So even if you're very smart and you do a mathematical calculation and you figure out exactly where the new moon is, we don't rely on that. We rely on the rabbis post Sanhedrin who were in Israel when it was destroyed, and they made a new calendar. So our calendar is really not dependent on our math. It's dependent on their math, because they were the rabbis who established Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, you can't change it nowadays, and we follow all those traditions. That's the end of today's Rambam. Now the Rambam is going to go, and he's going to go and do the calculations, because even though it's not dependent on our calculation, it's a mitzvah to know their calculations. But that's how it's interesting, because the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh is dependent on seeing it, right? And the witness is seeing it. So our calculation of the calendar goes back to the last time people saw it. The last time it was done properly, it goes back to that.
I mean, the people, the witnesses saw the moon.
Correct. The last time the witnesses saw the moon, and then we calculate from there. So we're really, by following our calendar, we're actually following the mitzvah.
What Ramban did try to recalculate the calendar?
Yeah, he does.
Oh, he does. Okay.
Yeah, it's famous.
Yeah.
He's going to get there.
He was a great mathematician, I know. Yeah.
He's going to get there in about.
He was astrologist, mathematician, doctor, all together.
He's going to get there in. Let me see.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to get there in 3 chapters. It's very difficult. It's actually very confusing.
I know. It's complex.
But there's a lot of computer programs now that do it for you, that could show you very well.
Yeah, there is a one setback of the computer program. It doesn't exercise your brain.
It's true. Computer. It's true. But
unless you wrote the program.
Well, so when you see the simulation of the moon and the sun, because the Rambam says everything is geocentric, and he says everything is mazalis, everything has the astrology.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So when you see the simulations of it, it makes it much easier when you're reading it and you're trying to figure out what he's trying to simulate. It's a lot harder. But when you see the simulations of different astronomy things, it makes it like obvious. It makes it so. He doesn't calculate how he calculates what he calculates. He just says, "Trust me, this is what I calculated," and plug in the figures into my calculation, and it will know where the moon is. But how I made a calculation where to plug in the figures, he says that I'm not sharing here. He said that's from mathematics, and he says the reason why I'm putting it in this book here, so you don't have to go to mathematics. You could just stick to my book. Yeah. Kiddush HaChodesh is like 18 chapters. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Have a good trip. Have a good week. If you need anything, let me know.
Is it okay if I come here like 1 or 2 for the mincha?
We don't have. You could just pray here. I don't know if I'll be here.
Oh, you
have to like text me. Yeah. I don't know if I'll be here.
Okay.
No,
in that case, I will be pray somewhere.
But you're staying in Prescott Valley, right? It's next to the hospital. Oh, okay, you're next to the hospital. There's like a medical, like hospital and like medical area there.
Where I need to go tomorrow is YRMC.
So there's 2 YRMCs. There's one in Prescott, one in Prescott Valley. Where you're staying is, so you have the hospital and then you have like tons of doctor offices and different clinics around it. So you're staying right near the Prescott Valley branch.
I'm staying, and the hospital I need to be in is the one near here.
The one
closer to here.
Oh, so that's right, like 5 minutes away.
That's where I'll be driving. Yeah.
You have a car here, or do you have to bring your own car?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, my mother's actually gonna come pick Baruch up because we're on one car right now. So my mother's in a few hours gonna pick up him to go back.
Oh, okay, cool.
He'll leave the car for me.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice. You'll be literally passing by here every day. All right, cool. And what are you studying?
Medicine.
Which one do you?
I don't know. I haven't decided on a specialty. Right now, I need to decide if I want to work with adults or kids. That's kind of right now. I either want to do internal medicine or pediatrics. But they're 2 different roads, so I need to decide.
Cool. All right. Well, enjoy.
Thank you. So, like in terms of this week, I should contact the.
If you text him today, I don't know if it's available. I mean, I could check if it's available.
Okay.
But if you contact him, if it's not available, we'll figure out another arrangement. But if it's available,
are they here across the road?
What? They like. Well, I don't know. They like when you use the app. They don't like when you. Come.
Oh, they don't like they do come on us.
Yeah, but he's gonna give you a link not to Airbnb, to another app.
Sure.
And then so when people sign in with Airbnb, it always like he can't give you the discount anymore because
of course, because it's central. Yeah, I understand.
So he's gonna just text him, and then he's super nice. He's from the valley. And he'll tell you if it's available, what's available, and then they're great. It's really great. We're really blessed to have that. Yeah, because there are tons of Airbnbs here, but a lot of them are very expensive, like very, very expensive. And that one is like a really good, just really, really good price and really good everything.
Great location.
Yeah.
Can't get any closer.
Yeah. So I mean, I look at it.
Thank you. I will be sure to.
Yeah.
Can't get any closer.
Maybe my father says it's the cheapest place to stay in town.
Yeah, it's the cheapest place in the whole Prescott because all the like hotels and everything are much more expensive than his discounts. I don't know like what discount he'll give. Like he's been giving 50% off, and it says Chabad discount, but I don't have any. That's the graciousness of his heart. I didn't ask for it even, so.
I'll contact him. And I'll say like, I'm staying going to be with Chabad.
Yeah, just say I'm gonna be with Chabad, and you'll see on the thing it says like Chabad discount.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll be in touch.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat tov.
Have a good week. Yeah. Okay, so this week's parsha is Lech Lecha. So Lech Lecha is the born. At what age he found out there was a God. There are different 3 opinions in the Midrash. Ultimately, the consensus of the rabbis is he had different realizations. So when he was 3, he questioned, he found there was a God. When he was 40, he found out more. When he was 48, he found out more. He was thrown in the fire by Nimrod. There are 10 tests that Avram goes through in Pirkei Avos. So the first several of his life are not even mentioned in the parsha. So that's there's a movie out, a kids movie, which is made by some Chabad people. It's a 3D movie, but it actually goes through those stories. It's actually pretty good. It's called, what's it called, Mendel?
Young Avraham.
It's called Young
You
Avraham.
want to watch it now?
Not now, but my kids actually love it because it's there's a whole business of like Bible movies Christians make. So there was someone a couple years ago who said, "Oh, make a Jewish one." And I think it cost like over $1 million. It was a big operation, 3D characters and actors and voiceovers, and I don't think they made their money back as much as they wanted to then. But I think years later they've finally become, it's for every Jewish kid knows all the lines. It doesn't have every possible opinion, and they didn't include everything because if they would include it, some of them you go through get into a rabbit hole. If you start another story, like for example, in last week's parsha, it says something very interesting, and Rashi quotes it. It says in the end of the parsha. Right at the end of the parsha, it says, "These are the generations of Terach." And then it says, Haran died during the lifetime of his father Terach in the land of his birth, Ur Kasdim. So Rashi says, it's very interesting. Rashi quotes the Midrash. Why is the Torah telling us that he died in his father's lifetime? Why is it necessary in the story here? So, he brings two opinions. One of them in the Midrash, it says the stargazers said that Nimrod was the king of the world at that time. Nimrod was an evil king. And the stargazers told him that Avram would have a son, that Terach would have a son. Terach was a general. He would have a son who would take over the kingdom. Who was that son? That was Avram. Avram would bring monotheism, because back then to be a king, you had to say you were God. So, what happens is he grows up, and ultimately Avram comes back, and in the story, in the Midrash, and this is what Rashi quotes, so it's obviously necessity in the simple interpretation of the Torah, Avram gets thrown in the furnace by Nimrod. It says there because he destroyed idols. But he stood up, he stood up to idolatry. Everyone was doing idolatry. So Avram gets thrown in the furnace, and Avram survived. Now his brother says, if Avram survives, then I'm becoming a monotheist. So he also accepted, and he was thrown in the fire, but he died. Haran died. And now interesting, and Ur Kasdim, and actually Rashi quotes, the Midrash says Ur Kasdim, this is the town with this fire. So Avram, it's only hinted out. And then Avram, the Torah tells us that, one second. So who is one second. Okay, so that is the end of that parsha, and in the end he goes to Haran. Now, the beginning of the parsha of Lech Lecha is when Avram Avinu is already 75 years old. So he's 75 years old, and he's in Haran, and he's become quite popular, as the beginning of the parsha says. It says that he should go. Avram went with the people all his converts. So Avram had a huge following in Haran, and he gets sent out to Israel. So Avram is 75, and this is the first time God communicates. The first time Avram is essentially mentioned in the Torah. He's mentioned last week, in genealogy, but the first time he's mentioned in the Torah, the first big accomplishment that's mentioned is when God speaks to Avram. So God speaks to Avram when he's 75. And he says, Lech Lecha. So this is just the context of the parsha. So, the Rebbe once spoke about it, and he said that Avram is 75 years old, and God tells him to go. And he says, he doesn't tell him where he's going to go. He just says, go. He doesn't tell him what's going to happen, what's going to go. And he's 75 years old, and he already built up his life, and he's already successful, and he already has all these followers. He's ready to retire. But God comes to him and he says, Lech Lecha, it's time to go. Where? I'm not telling you. Trust me, I'll take you to the best place. So ultimately he goes to Eretz Canaan. Again, he doesn't have the promised land of Canaan yet. He's not like he's going to his land. He goes to Eretz Canaan, and right away there is a famine. That's the next thing we have in verse number 10. There's a famine. Now, the famine, Rashi says, is the first time there was a famine in the history of the universe. Until then, Avram was born 1948 years after the creation of the world. He's 75 years old, so 1948 for 75, right?
2023.
Yeah.
Jewish year.
Yeah, 2023. And then he comes and there's a famine, and they're going to starve. Then he goes to Egypt. So the Rebbe says this is what God was trying to teach Avram. Avram was the first of the Jewish people, which Avram is considered the first of the Jewish people. He's trying to teach him how to trust God. Trying to teach him that you have to always put your trust in God and know that God's always going to take care of you. And God does not need any tools to do that. In other words, God will send you to Egypt. So when he's going to Egypt and he says, oh no, this is a bad idea, in fact, God is teaching him, no, it's a good idea. Trust me. You don't need to set up your life. There's no security outside of me. So Avram goes, and of course he has to go to Egypt. And then in Egypt he has a story of Sarai. They take his wife, his wife is very old at that time. They take his wife, and he says, it's my sister, etc., etc. We have all these stories. So this is actually the story of Avram's life, that God is telling him, human beings, we tend thing God is doing is he's telling. Now, another thing is God tells them, Lech Lecha. And of course, that's Lecha. And of course, that's unusual language. Lech Lecha means go to you. It doesn't mean go to Israel. It means go to you. So Rashi says Lech Lecha means it's for your good. So he's actually testing Abraham. He's saying it's going for your good, lehanascha, for your benefit, and letevascha, for your good. So Avram, each time one of these things happens, he's going to be questioning it, and that's going to be his challenge. That's going to be his test. To trust, is God really doing something for my good, or am I sacrificing everything for no good? So that's Rashi's interpretation. In Hasidism, there are all of these different interpretations. The Alter Rebbe says that if you take the first verse, it says, Lech Lecha, go to yourself. Reveal your true identity. In other words, until now, Avram was very holy, and he was very, Avram was very holy, and he was following God and was a monotheist. But God said, it's not enough. Lech Lecha, you have to go to your true self. You have to reveal your true identity. Your true identity is someone who trusts me. So actually, it's an incredible thing. And actually, it has to do with today's Hayom Yom. Today's Hayom Yom says that before the giving of the Torah, Avram found out God existed, then he spread it, and then he started doing. Nowadays, we first do, and then we understand, right? We first do, and then we spread, and then we understand that God exists. That's what we do nowadays. So here, Rashi, when he's 75 years old, the Torah says, okay, everything you did now, giving your life and everything like that, it was called, because that's what you understood was the best thing. So when you do something good because you understand it, it's still tied to survival. It's still tied to your intuition. God, in the beginning of this parsha, is saying your true self is beyond your intuition. Your true self is listening to me. That's your true self. So he says, now in the verse it says, Lech lecha mi'artzecha miladtecha v'besavecha. Go out from your land, from the place of your birth, and from your father's home. So a lot of the commentaries ask, it should be the opposite. First you go out of your father's home, then you go out of the city that you were born, and then you go out of your land. Why does it say it the opposite order? Another question is why does it have to say it in 3 sets? Say it in 1 set. Say, go out from your land. And you're obviously going to go out of your birthplace and your father's house. We know where Avram is. We know Avram is with his father. We just said it at the end of the last week's parsha. So there are many, many answers to this. Many, many answers to this question. And I'll just share one, a Hasidic answer. So the Hasidus explains that Artzecha means, the root word of Eretz is desire. We spoke about it in another Sikha. Eretz means to run. Rutz means to run. Run is connected to desire. So Artzecha means go out from your physical desires. That's number one. He's telling him, so it's such a deep lesson that Avram Avinu, his whole life of discovering God and making sacrifices and bringing people, that was all part of his desires. That was all part of him, his personality. And God is saying to go out of that. You gotta go out of that and trust me more. So first thing he says, Lech lecha mi'artzecha, go out of your worldly desires. The next thing is Moladatecha, from your birthplace. So Hasidism explains that there's a lot of us that we make sacrifices for Judaism. Why do we make sacrifices for Judaism? It's habitual. We know it's the right thing. So when you know something's the right thing and you're convinced it's the right thing, it's not really a sacrifice, right? It's the right thing for me. So God says, until now you've been doing the right thing because that's your inborn. That's what you grow up doing. You have to go out of that. And then finally says, go out from your father's house. Now, in Hasidism, father is connected to wisdom. So he says, go away from your wisdom of the evil inclination. Mebeis avicha means, until now, you were doing everything, perhaps Avram, you were doing everything because it was rational, but it wasn't necessarily fully holy. It had to do with your intellect, which also gets caught up with an evil inclination. So go out from that. To where should you go? El haaretz asher reka, to the land which I will show you. So God is saying, go out from your nature, go out from your habits, go out from your desires, go out from what you think is right, to do what I will show you is right. And that's the first part.
Things are figurative or metaphorical.
So that's according to Hasidism, yeah. I mean, Rashi is not so bothered with the three things. And there are many people who interpret what are the three layers of going out from. There are three layers. It can't just be, he's telling him now, it can't just be telling you, go out from the land that you're in, because he's with his father. Now, what's interesting to note, he's with his father in his place of his birth. So obviously, if he goes out, he's going to go out from all three. So it has to be telling us something deeper than now. There's something very, very interesting about this. Avraham had 10 tests. The final test is the story of the Akedah. That's the final test. So there's 10 tests. The 9th test is to give a circumcision, There's 10 tests. The first 2 tests are alluded to in last week's Parsha. What was Avram's first test? The first test was Avram. So in Jewish tradition, Avram basically, he was in hiding for many years from Nimrod. And that was the first test. He was in hiding. So in order to believe in God, he had to risk his life and hide. And then actually, in Jewish tradition, Avram ends up going to the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. So Shem is, yeah, that's true. Shem is Noach's son. And then Shem has a son. And then he has a son named Aver. And so Aver and his grandson Shem, what's Shem's son's name? Arpachshad.
I don't know, but I just
Yes.
Avram shows Noah.
So this is actually interesting. Avram actually gets to live, Avram's life overlaps with Noach. So he goes and he meets Noach in Jewish tradition. Noach, Shem, and Shem's grandson Aver. I guess Arpachshad might be in there. We always call it the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. So there's a middle son in there. So now Noach is obviously a monotheist. He's a monotheist, and Shem is also. And Shem is mentioned later. Shem is going to be mentioned. He's known as Malki Tzedek later on in the Torah. Malki Tzedek, he lives in the city of Shalem. Shalem is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not named Jerusalem yet. It's actually in the Torah. We don't find the word Yerushalayim. There's no city of Yerushalayim. It's known as Shalem. And Shem in the Torah it's not. So Shalem is the city of Yerushalayim, and Malki Tzedek, who is Shem, is there, and Noach is there. And Avram learns monotheism from there, and he hears the story of the flood and everything like that, which happened hundreds and hundreds of years before. So that's just an interesting fact. So he basically, Avram, in his lifetime, he discovers there's a God through his own intellect. He discovers there's a God. And then, after he discovers there's a God, he goes to Shem, and he learns Shem and Aver and Noach, and he learns about Jewish history, how God communicated with Noach. And then he comes back, and then so it's, Avram's quite a wise scholar, but even after everything he knows from Noach and everything like that, those things aren't even mentioned in the Torah. Because those things all took, the reason why in Hasidism at least, all took a natural course of order. Avram, just by being intellectual, discovered there's a God, and then he made sacrifices for God. Those are the first two tests, and they're not mentioned because Avraham, his true relationship with God begins in this week's parsha, where God communicates to him, and God kind of tells him, everything you know until now is nothing compared to what you're going to know. So that's this week's.
This gives a genealogy from Noah
To
all
Avram.
the way down to Abraham.
So if you think about it, it's quite interesting.
So necessarily so, because
Well,
the whole genealogy starts over with Noah.
so it's quite interesting. He's going and he's meeting his great grandfather, and he's learning from him. How many? Yeah, there's 10 generations from Noach till Avraham. Then Pirkei Avos says he's meeting his great times 10, and his son, and in the Midrash actually it says that Noach knows, because Noach's a prophet. He communicates. God communicates to him. He knows that Avram is a guy who's going to come, who's going to start a new trend in the world. He's going to start a new trend. Now Noach, we don't find that Noach discovered God. We find that God communicated with him.
Well, he commanded him to build the ark.
Correct. So Noach, we don't find any stories where God communicated with him. If God communicates with you, you'll probably be aware of God. Avram actually, a lot of his credit God on his own, and only after did God communicate. And it's interesting because as far as Gentiles go, Gentiles have a mitzvah to know there's a God. And what does that mean? It means, and Jewish people as well, but our mitzvah goes further than that. It means that you have to use your intellect to discover God. You have to think about whatever needs to be thought about to discover God. So actually, that is a mitzvah for the whole world, because Avram is not only a father of the Jews, right? He's the father of the most of the world. He's a father of the Ishmaelites. He's a father of Esav, the Romans, and then he has Avram has more kids, the Bnei Keturah. A lot of people say that Avram's also the father of the Asians. Later on, we find that Avram marries a third wife, which is technically his second wife, but it's the same lady comes back, and she has a new name, and it says that Avram sent them east. And in Jewish tradition, a lot of commentators say that those are the Chinese and the Japanese and the Asians. So that's interesting. The Rebbe spoke about it. The Rebbe was kind of against retiring, and he said, here you have Avram, he's 75 years old. The Torah says he built up a whole movement, and he's a rabbi, and he has this and that. And God says, Lech Lecha, now you're starting. Now is your story in the Torah. So,
But, when God...
Yeah, well, God communicated with him. God communicated with him. So Avram lived 75 years believing in God.
There was still tzaddikim in those days.
Avram lived
There was still tzaddikim.
that's true. Avram lived 75 years without God communicating to him. And he only lived a short life relatively. Avram lived 173 years.
175.
175 years. And then,
Years
So,
after,
don't find any story that Noach discovered God. And there were certain people, it could be also like Noach. There were 10 generations from Adam to Noach. So it could.
Is there a midrash on the verse
You couldn't
where
know
God
from
spoke to
Mr.
Noah?
Yeah, but we just don't find that Noach had any. So Avram's father were idolaters. Noach's father was righteous, right?
Lamech was right.
Yeah, I believe so. And then Adam,
his grandfather
God
was
communicate.
also
God,
like
please,
his
Mendel, you keep interrupting. You have Adam. God communicated to Adam. God communicated to Adam's sons, right? They knew about God. It wasn't like they.
Well, certainly Adam did.
So some people were able to trace back and to know about God. And there were probably a lot of people who believed in God in the times of Noach. They just didn't believe God was in charge of the world. They said God, in fact, after the great flood, did they believe in God? You better bet they did. They built a tower to go fight him, right? So they believed in God. So Noach, Nimrod, actually, we find Nimrod, the king during Avram's time, didn't believe in God. And and Avram's father didn't believe in God. So Avram was born, he didn't believe in God, but he found God intellectually. He found God. Noach, there were a lot of people who believed in God in Noach's time. Noach was.
Mind his own business.
We don't find that Noach. We don't find that Noach had this challenge of Avram. There's tons of midrashim about Avram. There's midrashim about Noach, Jewish halachically, because you can only be Jewish halachically after the giving of the Torah. As we find in the Torah, the Jewish people convert then, right? That's their conversion. They go through conversion. They go through the mikvah and everything. So Avram is nevertheless called the first Jew. He's not necessarily a halachic Jew, but he's considered the first Jew because he's the first one who started believing in God on his own and started integrating that belief that he discovered into his life. But Avram is always called the first Jew everywhere, but he's not halachically Jewish, and he knows that. You know, that's part of his narrative, first glance. Well, second glance, no. There's no extra words in the Torah.